Stone Cold Prose, Building Better Words.
Pierre Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada from 1968 to 1984, once famously remarked, "Living next to the United States is in some ways like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered is the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt." Canada is much in the news lately, and for once I feel as if I am ahead of the curve on a news trend, because Canada has been much on my mind for some years now. Unlike many people here in the States, I make a point of trying to consume quite a bit of foreign media and opinion so I can get a better understanding of the wider world that I live in. And this includes a great number of news shows, podcasts, and TV entertainment coming from the Great White North. So here's my loony on the subject. Canadians will get that. They won't think it's funny, but they'll get it. Hi guys. Welcome back to Stone Cold Prose, where we build better words, better thoughts, and better men, if not necessarily better jokes. I'm Miles Watson, novelist and author of numerous award-winning series, including Cage Life, Sinner's Cross, and The Chronicles of Magnus. I worked in Hollywood for 12 years, law enforcement for another 10, and now I break it all down and build it back better. So in the words of one of my favorite actors, a Canadian, Nicholas Campbell, let's get into this. The US-Canada relationship is a curious one because it reminds me of the mountains I used to see every day from my front porch in Burbank. They were so present that I usually failed to notice them at all. It was the same, actually, during the month I spent in Tucson. The first days that I was there, they were the only thing I saw, and after that, they may as well have not existed at all. I had to be reminded of them. And I always had the same startled reaction. Look at those things, mountains. They were simply too big for my eyes to see. And for most Yanks, by which I mean Yanks who do not live in the border states or in close proximity to them, Canada is like that. It's the massive neighbor we never really think about until we have some direct cause to do so. Although recent events have shown some Americans can be horribly insulting and condescending about Canada, there is nothing condescending in this particular American attitude, except in Quebec, where the language is French and much of the architecture is old world European rather than North American in style. Canada is sufficiently similar to the States as to feel less like a foreign country to us than, say, Britain. And of course, it is a hell of a lot closer than Britain, or Ireland for that matter, or Australia or New Zealand for that matter. When a Yank's in Vancouver, he will certainly notice little differences here and there. But he will never experience the disorientation or discomfort he will certainly encounter if he is in France or Italy or Morocco or Japan and he doesn't speak the language. Put simply, he's away from home, but he doesn't feel away from home. Now, part of this rests in the famous and largely accurate Canadian kindliness, which is so much like American Midwestern friendliness, except it's even more pronounced. But most of it rests in the fact that the cultural differences between us are small and pleasing rather than large and jarring. They are just obtrusive enough to give the Yank a romantic sense that he's somewhere else, without oppressing him with the scary knowledge that he is somewhere else. Now, I must make a full and immediate confession. When I was in high school in Maryland in the 80s, knowing nothing about Canada except that it existed, I occasionally made these jeering remarks to a Canadian kid in my school that Canada was, yeah, you guessed it, nothing but the 51st state. Now, this is a common American insult, leveled at Canadians, though in my case it came more out of stupidity than malice. Knowing jack all about Canada's history, I viewed it as a kind of giveaway of the British Empire, the colonies that didn't rebel, the ones who were granted their independence rather than taking it for themselves, and who were otherwise culturally indistinguishable from us, the Americans. The existence of Canada, in so much as I contemplated it at all, seemed weird to me. They were foreigners, but not really. They spoke our language, played our sports, shared our continent, watched our television, and exported large quantities of their citizens to work and play within our borders. Citizens you didn't even know were Canadian until they told you, because what we refer to as the Canadian accent in the States is actually only the accent of a certain area or areas and certain classes in Canada. Indeed, outside Quebec province, where you naturally hear a lot of Quebecois accented English, I can recall hearing only one Great White North accent anywhere in British Columbia when I was working there. Literally only one. Now, please note my use of the word our in what I just said. It assumes an ownership of things which, in fact, I as an American do not actually own, such as the title of American, or for that matter, the English language. This Americanocentric, I just made that up, view of the world is one of the outstanding characteristics of people from the States, combining an ignorance of the rest of the world with a disinterest in learning anything about it. Salted heavily with the arrogance of being born post-1945 into a superpower, or post-1991, a hyperpower. Now, the reasons for this are complex, but they lie on a bedrock of geography, which far predates our status as any kind of power. The United States, massive as it is, has exactly two contiguous neighbors, Canada and Mexico, neither of which have ever presented a military threat to us. We have to them. Because of this, because to the north and south we have only neighbors and not threats, and because our flanks are protected by two mighty oceans, Atlantic and Pacific, Americans have always been more occupied with themselves than with anyone else anywhere in the world. Our interest in Europe is really a modern 20th century phenomenon, and then only the result of two world wars, and then only very reluctantly. Our interest in Asia, outside the considerations of a handful of military strategists and diplomats, is purely commercial in nature. Americans, as a rule, care about America, and absolutely nowhere else. Facts. Now, this attitude is actually partially forgivable because the size of the United States allows an American citizen to see pretty much every known climate and geographical oddity, feature, thingy, without leaving even our contiguous borders. If you throw in Alaska and Hawaii and some of the territories that we have, i.e. Puerto Rico, American Samoa, and the U.S. Virgin Islands, there's just about nothing you cannot experience right here in the USA, from a rainforest to a desert, from a mountain range to prairies that go on literally for 3 days. Drive across them. Nevertheless, this attitude is aggravating and insulting to foreigners and deeply dangerous to ourselves. American conservatism, which finds its deepest root in the isolationist philosophy of George Washington, still clings to the idea that America can ignore the rest of the world, that we neither need nor need respect those darn foreigners. The main trouble with this attitude is that we no longer live in the 1700s, or the 1800s, or even the 1900s for that matter. Technology has, for practical purposes, shrunk the size of the planet, while also dissolving many of its frontiers. The global economy, an almost incredibly complex interweaving of stock markets, trade deals, military partnerships, cultural exchanges, mass migration, and all the rest of it, none of which, by the way, could have been anticipated by General Washington, is a fact of life. And short of a nuclear war, it is not going anywhere. Isolationism is an effective emotional appeal to Americans, but it has no basis in economic, military, or political reality. The world has grown too small and its parts are too interconnected. What affects one affects all, no matter how hard you happen to sing America the Beautiful. That's what Pierre Trudeau was talking about. And this brings me back north to Canada. Until Donald Trump came back to the White House, the relationship of Canada to the United States could, I would personally argue, be likened to that between brothers who settle next door to each other. They have a history, and history includes baggage. There's a definite hierarchy in the way that brothers treat each other, big brothers and little brothers, for example, which can prove insulting or just merely annoying. And their interests occasionally conflict. Each has somewhat of a different way of viewing the world, of conducting their personal business, and each has its own individual tastes. Taken at a glance, however, they are remarkably similar, generally enjoy a friendly relationship, and whenever they sense a threat, immediately come together, sleeves rolled up, fists clenched, ready to handle their brotherly business if need be. Canadians remember, even though we Yanks often forget, that Canadians fought side by side with us in World War I. They were there first. World War II, they were there first. Korea, and the global war on terror, taking losses far out of proportion to their relatively small population. Trump's 51st state rhetoric strikes many Americans, by which I mean mostly the Americans who voted for Trump, as amusing. It is in their minds simply a verbalization of what many in the States have long thought about Canada, or joked about Canada, including me when I was a high school brat in the 80s. But there is a critical difference here, actually several critical differences. Firstly, this was not a snarky remark uttered by a drunk from Newark at a Canucks Devils game, and therefore just meaningless bullshit talk. It was made by the President of the United States, and moreover by a president who has a habit of disguising very definite, concrete plans inside of hyperbolic rhetoric, and whose lack of understanding of domestic and international laws is matched only by his lack of respect for them. In short, it is not merely an insult, it is a threat, and a very specific and alarming one at that. But let us discuss the insult first, because it's folly to assume that the primitive emotions aroused by being insulted do not play into international politics. For the last 9 years, Canada has suffered, in my opinion, under the misrule of Justin Trudeau, a globalist whose stated intention was to turn Canada into a post-national state. In Trudeau's vision, Canada would cease to be a sovereign nation and transition smoothly into an economic unit of the global economy, one which, through the process of mass immigration, would also lose any sense of cultural identity. Canada, in short, would flee into a post-national world citizen identity, very similar to the cosmopolitanism of aristocrats 200 or even 100 years ago. You know, the people who called themselves British or German or Russian, but all seemed to speak French at home and live 90% of the year in Paris or the Riviera. The effects of Trudeau's policies are outside the scope of this video, but manifestly clear to anyone who can read a spreadsheet on the declining effectiveness of Canadian healthcare, the power of the Canadian military, which is basically now zero, housing costs and rental prices, which are skyrocketing, or the number of hours it is necessary for the ordinary person to work in order to keep a roof over their head in Toronto or Vancouver or Montreal. Now, I mention this because the course Trudeau embarked upon, the course which would erase and was erasing, in my opinion, Canadian identity, has been violently altered on an emotional level by the contemptuous threats of our American President, Trump. Canadians who understand American history have long harbored suspicions about America's ultimate motives for Canada vis-a-vis her natural resources, including water, I might add. One of the better TV shows I've ever seen, Intelligence, which was created by the great Chris Haddock from Vancouver, tackled these topics in such an uncomfortably forthright way that the CBC canceled the show, which was excellent, rather than ruffle American feathers. But the ordinary Canadian viewed 51st State talk as no more than stupid smack from their sometimes obnoxious but generally caring and loving brother next door. Trump's rhetoric has changed that. He not only insulted every Canadian, he said in essence that he wasn't sure little brother should have his own home, his own car, his own wife, his own kids, or his own dog for that matter. He said, in essence, that he didn't feel any particular need to respect the property line between them or even little brother's status as an adult, his agency, his independence. He said, in essence, nice country you've got there. Wouldn't it be a shame if someone came along and took it from you? Trump's tariffs and threats of tariffs are proof that the 51st State talk is not merely the hyperbolic trolling rhetoric Trump has often so effectively employed to please his base, but a definite statement of intent. Most Americans do not know this, but Canada was twice invaded by the United States. once during the Revolutionary War and once during the War of 1812. Both invasions failed, obviously, which is of course why Americans don't know about them. And both invasions failed because they underestimated Canada's sense of identity, which existed long before Canada had been granted her independence from Great Britain. Now, notwithstanding, a small minority of Canadian citizens would find it convenient for personal or for business reasons. Canada has never wanted to be part of the United States, and it is understandable that they resent being denied recognition that they are a separate entity, both politically and culturally. Now, Trump's threats don't mean he necessarily intends to send the troops rolling over the border like we did in 1775 or 1812, but it does mean he understands that economic warfare is warfare, and like conventional warfare, is employed to break the political will of the enemy. And like all warfare, presupposes there is an enemy. And the effect of declaring Canada an enemy has been to erase 9 years of Trudeauism, at least as it applies to Canada's sense of national identity. Canadians are not only mad as hell, they are conscious of being Canadians in a way that they may not have been, collectively, anyway, since Trudeau tried to brainwash them into thinking they were nothing but global citizens. Now, Gord Downie, the Canadian singer-songwriter, once quipped, "To call ourselves a country, it means we must become one." He was speaking for many in Canada who felt the nation lacked a strong sense of identity and was merely a collection of provinces with differing political and economic interests loosely held together by a flag and some federal money. But the funny thing about national identity is that it tends to come to the surface most forcefully not during times of national celebration or prosperity, but during times of threat. When Canadians say elbows up, they are referring to the fighting pose of a hockey player. They are saying that they are ready to drop the stick, toss the gloves, and start throwing punches. The whole country is now saying elbows up, and the fists on the end of those elbows are directed at us here in the States. It's sad that they have had to adopt this posture. It's sad that a country with whom we share a 5,525-mile border, the longest in the world, is now looking to the EU for its security guarantees and to China, India, and Europe rather than the States for economic trade agreements, when we are its largest trading partner and vice versa. And it is even sadder for me, as an American citizen, to feel embarrassed at the clumsy, reckless, bullying, ham-fisted methods that have been used on our inoffensive neighbor and brother to the north. When I was in Montreal and Quebec last year, I could not have been treated any nicer by complete strangers than if I were staying with my oldest and best friends. Canadians have always taken for granted that whatever stupid jokes or insults we might periodically exchange, when push comes to shove, their fellow Americans from the States would be by their side, ready to fight with them and for them. Few of them ever dreamed we would be doing the pushing and the shoving. But here we are. Kind of makes you think, eh? Folks, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and remember to buy my books. The link is in the description if I remember to put it there. I drop scripted content every Friday at 3 p.m., shorts almost every day, and unscripted rants whenever rage moves me to do so. See you next time, and until then, stay cold, unless you're in Canada, in which case, you knew I was going to say this, stay warm. Eh?